Hashtag the discovery in the frozen cave. The morning sun barely penetrated the thick layer of ice that covered everything in the remote mountains of northern Alaska. Dr. Sarah Chun pulled her heavy winter coat tighter around her body as she stepped out of the research station. The weather had been brutal for the past 3 weeks. What started as a normal winter storm had turned into one of the worst ice storms the region had seen in decades. Sarah was a wildlife biologist who had come to this isolated area to study the migration patterns of Arctic animals. She had been stuck at the research station with her small team for days, waiting for the weather to clear enough for them to continue their work. The ice storm had made travel impossible, and even their snowmobiles couldn't navigate through the thick sheets of ice that covered the ground. On this particular morning, Sarah noticed that the wind had finally died down. The constant howling that had kept everyone awake for nights had stopped. She decided it might be safe enough to venture out and check the weather monitoring equipment that had been set up around the station. The equipment was crucial for their research, and they needed to make sure it was still functioning after the harsh weather. Sarah grabbed her emergency radio, a GPS device, and her camera. She also packed extra batteries, some energy bars, and a thermos of hot coffee. The temperature outside was still well below freezing, and she knew she couldn't stay out for too long. Her plan was to check the 3 closest monitoring stations and return to the base before the weather could change again. The first 2 monitoring stations were only about half a mile from the research base. Sarah found them covered in thick ice, but they appeared to be functioning properly. The solar panels were completely covered, but the backup batteries were still providing power to the instruments. She cleared what ice she could and took notes about the condition of each station. The 3rd monitoring station was located about 2 miles away, near a series of caves that carved deep into the mountainside. Sarah had visited these caves before during her research. They provided shelter for various animals during harsh weather, and she had documented several species using them over the years. The caves were also interesting from a geological perspective, as they contained unusual mineral formations that created beautiful crystal structures. As Sarah approached the area where the 3rd monitoring station was located, she immediately noticed something was wrong. The entire landscape looked different. The ice storm had created a thick shell of ice over everything. But near the caves, the ice formations were particularly strange. It looked as if water had been flowing out of the caves, and then frozen instantly, creating massive icicles and ice walls that blocked most of the cave entrances. Sarah found the monitoring station buried under several feet of ice and snow. It would take hours to dig it out and check its condition. She was about to start the work when she heard something that made her stop completely. It was a sound unlike anything she had ever heard before. It was low and rumbling, almost like a very deep purr, but with a musical quality that seemed to echo from inside the caves. At first, Sarah thought it might be the wind moving through the ice formations. The storm had created many unusual acoustic effects over the past few weeks. But as she listened more carefully, she realized that the sound had a rhythm to it. It would rise and fall in a pattern that seemed almost like singing. There was also something about the sound that suggested it was coming from a living creature, not just the wind. Sarah's scientific curiosity overcame her caution. She had spent years studying animal behavior, and she had never heard anything like this sound before. She carefully approached the largest cave entrance, which was partially blocked by a massive wall of ice. The sound was definitely coming from inside the cave, and it seemed to be getting louder as she got closer. The cave entrance was blocked by ice that was several feet thick, but there was a small gap near the top where Sarah could see into the darkness beyond. She pulled out her flashlight and shined it through the gap. The beam of light revealed a large cavern that extended much further back than she had realized. The walls were covered with ice, but she could also see the colorful mineral formations that made these caves unique. As Sarah adjusted the angle of her flashlight, she saw movement in the depths of the cave. At first, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. The movement was too large and too fluid to be from any animal she knew lived in this region. But as she continued to watch, she became certain that there was something very large moving around inside the cave. The sound continued, and Sarah began to notice that it had different tones and patterns. Sometimes it was a low, gentle rumbling. Other times it became higher-pitched, almost like a whimper or a cry. As she listened, she began to think that the sounds might be some form of communication. It reminded her of the way some large mammals communicated with their young. Sarah knew she needed to get a better look at whatever was inside the cave. The gap in the ice wall was too small for her to fit through, but she might be able to widen it. She had some basic tools with her, including a small ice axe that she carried for emergency situations. She began carefully chipping away at the ice around the gap. The work was slow and difficult. The ice was incredibly hard, and Sarah had to be careful not to cause the entire ice wall to collapse. As she worked, the sound from inside the cave continued. She began to notice that the sounds seemed to respond to the noise she was making. When she stopped chipping at the ice, the sounds would become louder and more urgent. When she resumed working, they would become softer and more rhythmic. After about an hour of careful work, Sarah had managed to create an opening that was just large enough for her to squeeze through. She was exhausted and cold, but her curiosity drove her forward. She carefully climbed through the opening and found herself standing inside the cave. The temperature inside the cave was noticeably warmer than outside, though still well below freezing. Sarah could see her breath forming clouds in the beam of her flashlight. The cave was larger than she had expected, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above her head. The walls were covered with both ice and the natural crystal formations that gave the cave its unique beauty. As Sarah moved deeper into the cave, following the source of the sounds, she began to see signs that some large animal had been living here. There were areas where the ground had been cleared of debris, almost as if something had been making a nest. She also noticed that some of the ice formations had been broken, as if something large had moved through the space. The sounds were getting louder and more distinct as Sarah moved further into the cave. She began to make out multiple different voices in the sounds. There was definitely one very deep, low voice, but there were also higher-pitched sounds that seemed to come from smaller sources. It reminded her of the way mother animals communicated with their babies. As Sarah rounded a bend in the cave passage, her flashlight beam fell upon something that made her stop completely. In a large chamber deep within the cave, she saw what appeared to be a massive reptilian creature. The creature was easily 20 feet long and covered with scales that reflected her flashlight beam like polished metal. Its head was enormous, with intelligent eyes that turned to look directly at her when the light hit them. Sarah's first instinct was to run. She had never seen anything like this creature before, and every instinct told her that she was in danger. But something about the creature's behavior stopped her from fleeing. Instead of appearing aggressive or threatening, the creature seemed to be protecting something. It was curled around what appeared to be several smaller versions of itself. As Sarah's eyes adjusted to the scene, she realized what she was looking at. The large creature was clearly a mother protecting her babies. The smaller creatures, which were about the size of large dogs, were huddled close to their mother for warmth and protection. They were the source of the higher-pitched sounds Sarah had been hearing. The mother creature watched Sarah carefully, but she didn't make any aggressive moves. Instead, she seemed to be studying the human who had entered her cave. Her eyes were remarkably intelligent, and Sarah got the distinct impression that the creature was trying to decide whether this unexpected visitor was a threat to her young. Sarah slowly lowered her flashlight so that the beam wasn't shining directly into the creature's eyes. She also slowly sat down on the cave floor, trying to make herself appear less threatening. As she did this, she noticed more details about the creatures and their situation. The mother creature appeared to be injured. There were several areas on her body where the scales were damaged, and Sarah could see what looked like frostbite on the edges of her wings. Yes, wings. Sarah realized that the large appendages folded against the creature's back were actually wings, though they appeared to be damaged by the cold. The baby creatures also showed signs of distress from the cold. They were pressed tightly against their mother, clearly seeking warmth. Their movements were slow and sluggish, which Sarah recognized as signs of hypothermia. It was clear that the ice storm had trapped this family in the cave just as effectively as it had trapped Sarah and her team at the research station. As Sarah observed the creatures, she began to piece together what had happened. The ice storm had been so severe that it had frozen the cave entrance, trapping the creatures inside. The mother had been protecting her young, but without access to food or a proper heat source, they were slowly freezing to death. The sounds Sarah had heard were the mother's attempts to keep her babies warm and calm in their desperate situation. Sarah realized that she was witnessing something extraordinary. These creatures were unlike anything in the scientific literature. They appeared to be some form of large reptile, but they had characteristics that didn't match any known species. The wings suggested they might be capable of flight, though they were clearly not birds. The intelligence in the mother's eyes and the complex vocal communications suggested a level of cognitive development that was remarkable. But beyond the scientific significance of the discovery, Sarah was moved by the obvious distress of the creature family. The mother was clearly doing everything she could to protect her young, but she was fighting a losing battle against the cold. Without intervention, it seemed likely that all of the creatures would perish in the cave. Sarah faced a difficult decision. She could return to the research station and report what she had found to the authorities. But by the time help arrived, it might be too late for the creatures. The babies were clearly in serious distress from the cold, and the mother was showing signs of exhaustion from her efforts to keep them warm. Alternatively, Sarah could try to help the creatures herself. But this would be dangerous for several reasons. First, she didn't know how the mother creature would react if Sarah got too close to her babies. Despite her apparent intelligence, she was still a wild animal protecting her young. Second, Sarah had no idea what these creatures needed in terms of food or care. And finally, there was the practical problem of how to help creatures of this size in their current location. As Sarah sat in the cave, considering her options, the mother creature began to make new sounds. These were different from the communications Sarah had heard before. They were softer and more musical, almost like a lullaby. As the mother made these sounds, the baby creatures began to settle down and appear more relaxed. Sarah realized that the mother was trying to calm her babies, probably because she sensed that Sarah might be able to help them. The intelligence in the creature's behavior was remarkable. She seemed to understand that Sarah was not a threat, and she was possibly hoping that this human visitor might be able to provide the help her family desperately needed. Sarah made her decision. She couldn't simply walk away from creatures that were clearly in distress, especially when she might be their only hope for survival. She would have to find a way to help them, even if it meant taking significant risks. The first step was to assess the immediate needs of the creatures. The most urgent problem was clearly the cold. The babies were showing advanced signs of hypothermia, and even a mother was being affected by the prolonged exposure to freezing temperatures. Sarah needed to find a way to provide additional warmth to the cave. Sarah remembered that she had seen signs of geothermal activity in some of the deeper caves in this area. If she could find a way to access warmer areas of the cave system, she might be able to create a better environment for the creatures. She also had emergency supplies back at the research station that could potentially help, including portable heaters and medical supplies. But first, Sarah needed to establish better communication with the mother creature. She needed to make it clear that she wanted to help, and she needed to ensure that the mother would allow her to get close enough to assess the condition of the babies. Sarah began speaking to the creatures in a soft, calm voice. She didn't expect them to understand her words, but she hoped that her tone would convey her peaceful intentions. As she spoke, she noticed that the mother creature's posture relaxed slightly. The creature was clearly listening to Sarah's voice and evaluating her behavior. Slowly and carefully, Sarah began to move closer to the creature family. She kept her movements slow and predictable, always making sure that the mother could see what she was doing. As she got closer, she could see more details about the creature's condition. The baby creatures were in worse condition than Sarah had initially realized. Their breathing was shallow and rapid, and their movements were becoming increasingly sluggish. Sarah recognized these as advanced signs of hypothermia. If something wasn't done quickly, the babies might not survive much longer. The mother creature watched Sarah's approach with intense attention, but she didn't make any threatening moves. In fact, she seemed to be allowing Sarah to get closer, as if she understood that the human might be able to help her babies. When Sarah was about 10 feet away from the creatures, she stopped and sat down again. From this distance, she could clearly see the extent of the family's distress. The mother's injuries were more severe than she had initially thought, and the babies were clearly in critical condition. Sarah realized that she needed to act quickly. She would have to return to the research station to get supplies, but she was worried about leaving the creatures alone for the time it would take to make the trip. The weather outside was still dangerous, and the round trip to the station would take several hours. As if sensing Sarah's dilemma, the mother creature began to make new sounds. These were different from anything Sarah had heard before. They were urgent, but not aggressive, almost pleading. The creature seemed to be asking for help, and Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Sarah made her decision. She would return to the research station as quickly as possible and gather everything she thought might help the creatures. She would bring portable heaters, food, medical supplies, and anything else that might be useful. She would also contact her colleagues and begin the process of getting professional help for the creatures. Before leaving, Sarah wanted to try to communicate to the mother creature that she would be returning with help. She stood up slowly and pointed toward the cave entrance, then pointed back to herself. She repeated this gesture several times, hoping that the intelligent creature would understand that she was leaving but would come back. The mother creature watched Sarah's gestures carefully. Then, in what seemed like a deliberate response, she made a series of low, musical sounds that were different from her previous vocalizations. Sarah chose to interpret this as acknowledgement and agreement. As Sarah prepared to leave the cave, she took one last look at the creature family. The sight of the mother, trying so desperately to protect her young in such difficult circumstances, strengthened her resolve. She would do everything in her power to help these remarkable creatures survive their ordeal. Sarah climbed back through the gap in the ice wall and emerged into the harsh cold of the outside world. The contrast between the cave and the external environment was shocking. She realized just how much protection the cave was providing for the creatures, but also how inadequate that protection was proving to be against the severity of the ice storm. The journey back to the research station was treacherous. The ice made every step dangerous, and the cold was so intense that Sarah could feel it penetrating through all of her protective clothing. But she pushed herself to move as quickly as safely possible, knowing that every minute could be crucial for the survival of the creatures in the cave. As Sarah made her way across the frozen landscape, she began planning what she would need to bring back to help the creatures. She would need portable heaters and fuel, warm blankets or insulating materials, food and water, and basic medical supplies. She would also need to find a way to transport all of these supplies across the difficult terrain. More importantly, Sarah knew she would need to contact the outside world and report her discovery. These creatures were clearly a new species, and their discovery would be of enormous scientific significance. But right now, the priority had to be keeping them alive long enough for proper help to arrive. The research station came into view just as Sarah was beginning to worry that she had gotten lost in the uniform white landscape. She had never been so happy to see the familiar buildings, and she quickened her pace as much as the icy conditions would allow. As Sarah approached the station, she could see smoke coming from the chimney, indicating that her colleagues were keeping the fires burning to maintain heat in the buildings. She knew they would be surprised by her long absence and concerned about her safety. She also knew that they would be skeptical of her story about the creatures in the cave. Sarah burst through the door of the main building, startling her two colleagues who were sitting near the fireplace drinking coffee and playing cards to pass the time during the storm. Dr. Marcus Webb and Dr. Lisa Rodriguez looked up in surprise as Sarah stumbled into the room, covered with ice and clearly exhausted from her journey. "Sarah, we're getting worried about you," Marcus said, jumping up from his chair. "You've been gone for hours. What happened out there?" Sarah pulled off her ice-covered gloves and coat while trying to catch her breath. She knew that what she was about to tell them would sound unbelievable, but she needed their help to save the creatures in the cave. "I found something extraordinary," Sarah said, her voice still shaking from the cold and excitement. "There are creatures trapped in one of the caves, and they're going to die if we don't help them immediately." Lisa looked at Sarah with concern. "What kind of creatures? Are you talking about some stranded Arctic animals?" Sarah shook her head. "No, these are unlike anything we've seen before. They're large reptilian creatures, a mother and her babies. They've been trapped in a cave by the ice storm, and they're suffering from severe hypothermia." Marcus and Lisa exchanged glances. They knew Sarah to be a careful and reliable scientist, but her story sounded incredibly far-fetched. "Sarah," Marcus said gently, "are you sure you're feeling all right? The cold and stress can sometimes cause hallucinations." "I'm not hallucinating," Sarah interrupted. "I know how this sounds, but I need you to trust me. These creatures are real, and they're going to die if we don't act quickly." Sarah quickly described what she had found in the cave, giving as many details as possible about the creature's appearance and behavior. As she spoke, she could see that her colleagues remained skeptical, but they were also beginning to take her seriously. "Even if what you're saying is true," Lisa said, "what can we do? We don't have the resources or expertise to help unknown creatures, especially in these weather conditions." "We have to try," Sarah insisted. "We have portable heaters, emergency supplies, and a responsibility as scientists to protect any life we encounter. I'm going back to that cave with or without your help, but I'd rather have your assistance." Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the harsh weather conditions. "Sarah, even if these creatures exist, going back out there is extremely dangerous. The temperature is still dropping, and another storm system is moving in. We could all end up trapped or worse." Sarah understood her colleagues' concerns, but she also knew that time was running out for the creatures in the cave. "Look, I understand the risks, but these creatures are incredibly significant from a scientific standpoint, and they're clearly intelligent. The mother creature seemed to understand that I was trying to help. We can't just let them die." Lisa looked at Marcus, and Sarah could see them having a silent conversation. Finally, Lisa spoke up. "Okay, Sarah, if you're this convinced, then we'll help you. But we need to be smart about this. We'll gather emergency supplies and make one trip to assess the situation. If it's as you describe, we'll figure out our next steps from there." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. With her colleagues' help, she had a much better chance of being able to save the creatures in the cave. The three scientists quickly began gathering supplies. They loaded portable propane heaters, extra fuel, warm blankets, first aid supplies, food, and water into sledges that could be pulled across the ice. They also packed emergency communication equipment and additional cold weather gear. As they prepared to leave, Sarah tried to contact the outside world using the station's radio equipment. However, the ice storm had damaged their main antenna, and they were only able to make intermittent contact with the outside. Sarah managed to send a brief message to their research coordinator, informing them of the situation and requesting emergency assistance, but she wasn't sure if the message had gotten through completely. The journey back to the cave was even more difficult with the loaded sledges, but having Marcus and Lisa along made the work much easier. Sarah led the way, retracing her path across the frozen landscape. The weather was continuing to deteriorate, and all three scientists knew they were taking significant risks by venturing out in these conditions. When they reached the area near the caves, Marcus and Lisa could immediately see the unusual ice formations that Sarah had described. The entire area looked like a frozen waterfall, with massive icicles and ice walls that created an otherworldly landscape. As they approached the cave where Sarah had made her discovery, the sounds from within became audible to all three scientists. Marcus and Lisa stopped in their tracks when they heard the low, musical vocalizations coming from inside the cave. "Those sounds," Lisa whispered. "I've never heard anything like them. They're more complex and organized than any animal vocalizations I know," Marcus added, his scientific skepticism beginning to give way to excitement. Sarah felt vindicated by her colleagues' reactions, but she also knew that the real test would come when they actually saw the creatures. She led Marcus and Lisa to the gap in the ice wall that she had widened earlier. "The opening is just large enough for one person at a time," Sarah explained. "I'll go through first and make sure the mother creature is comfortable with our presence. Then you can follow one at a time." Sarah squeezed through the gap in the ice wall, followed by Marcus and then Lisa. All three scientists found themselves standing in the cave, their flashlight beams illuminating the extraordinary scene before them. The reaction of Marcus and Lisa to seeing the creatures for the first time was exactly what Sarah had expected. Both scientists stood in complete silence for several long moments, trying to process what they were seeing. "This is impossible," Marcus finally whispered. "Creatures like this don't exist in any classification system." "Look at the intelligence in the mother's eyes," Lisa said softly, "and the way she's positioned herself to protect the young ones. This behavior is remarkably sophisticated." The mother creature had noticed the arrival of the additional humans, but she didn't seem alarmed by their presence. In fact, she appeared to recognize Sarah and seemed to understand that the new arrivals were with her. Sarah approached the creature family slowly, just as she had done during her first visit. But this time, when she got within 10 feet of the creatures, the mother did something unexpected. She made a series of soft vocalizations, and then carefully moved aside, creating space for the humans to get closer to her babies. "She's asking us to help her young," Sarah said with amazement. "Look at how deliberately she's moving. She understands that we're here to help." Marcus and Lisa watched in fascination as the mother creature continued to communicate with the humans through her vocalizations and body language. It was clear that these were not just instinctual responses, but deliberate attempts at communication. The three scientists quickly set to work setting up the portable heaters in strategic locations around the creature family. As the heaters began to warm the air in the cave chamber, the baby creatures began to show immediate signs of improvement. Their breathing became less labored, and they began to move more actively. The mother creature watched the humans working and seemed to understand what they were trying to accomplish. She made encouraging sounds to her babies and appeared to be helping to position them so they could benefit from the additional warmth. As the cave warmed up, Sarah, Marcus, and Lisa were able to get a better look at the creatures and assess their condition more thoroughly. The baby creatures appeared to be suffering from severe hypothermia and dehydration, but they were responding well to the additional warmth. The mother creature was clearly exhausted and showed signs of prolonged stress, but she appeared to be in less immediate danger than her young. "We need to get fluids into the babies," Lisa said, drawing on her experience with wildlife medicine. "Hypothermia causes severe dehydration, and they need to rehydrate to fully recover." The challenge was figuring out how to provide appropriate fluids to creatures they had never encountered before. Sarah decided to try off. As the day wore on, the weather outside continued to deteriorate. Sarah tried repeatedly to contact the outside world for help, but the radio communications remained unreliable. The three scientists realized they might be trapped in the cave with the creatures until the storm passed. But as challenging as the situation was, all three scientists felt privileged to be witnessing something truly extraordinary. They were observing a new species that displayed remarkable intelligence and complex social behaviors. The mother creature continued to communicate with them through vocalizations and gestures, and it was clear that she had developed a level of trust in the humans who had come to help her family. As night fell and the temperature outside dropped even further, Sarah, Marcus, and Lisa settled in for what would likely be a long vigil with their remarkable new companions. They had managed to stabilize the creature's condition for now, but they knew that the real challenge would be finding a way to get them out of the cave and to proper care. The story of the ice storm that had brought this human and dragon family together was far from over, but the first crucial step had been taken. Trust had been established, immediate danger had been addressed, and hope had been kindled in the depths of a frozen cave where two very different species had found common ground in their struggle for survival. The long night of trust, the storm outside grew worse as darkness fell over the frozen landscape. Inside the cave, the three scientists had created a small camp near the dragon family, keeping the portable heaters running and monitoring the condition of the mother and her babies. The warmth from the heaters had made a dramatic difference, but Sarah knew they were still in a precarious situation. Dr. Marcus Webb sat near one of the heaters, carefully documenting everything he observed about the creatures. As a zoologist, he had studied animal behavior for over 20 years, but nothing had prepared him for what he was witnessing. The intelligence displayed by the mother dragon was unlike anything in the scientific literature. "Look at how she's organizing her young," Marcus whispered to his colleagues. "She's not just keeping them warm. She's positioning each baby in the optimal location to benefit from our heaters. That level of spatial reasoning is remarkable." Dr. Lisa Rodriguez was focused on the medical aspects of the situation. She had experience treating hypothermia in various Arctic animals, but these creatures were so large and unique that she had to rely on general principles rather than specific knowledge. The baby dragons were now drinking water regularly and showing much more activity than when the scientists had first arrived. "Their respiratory rates have stabilized," Lisa reported quietly. "And look at their eyes, they're much more alert now. I think we've successfully treated the acute hypothermia, but they're going to need continued warmth and nutrition to fully recover." Sarah watched the mother dragon carefully. Throughout the long evening, the massive creature had shown an incredible range of behaviors that demonstrated her intelligence and emotional complexity. She would comfort her babies with gentle vocalizations when they seemed distressed. She would watch the humans intently when they moved around the cave, clearly trying to understand their actions. Most remarkably, she had begun to respond to simple gestures and seemed to be learning to communicate with her human helpers. As the night progressed, Sarah noticed that the mother dragon was becoming more comfortable with human presence. Earlier, she had been protective and cautious, allowing the humans to help but maintaining a careful distance. Now, she was actively engaging with them, making specific vocalizations when she wanted their attention and even gesturing toward her babies when she thought they needed care. "She's trying to teach us how to help her," Sarah realized. "Watch this." Sarah approached one of the baby dragons who appeared to be shivering despite the warmth from the heaters. The mother dragon immediately made a series of low, musical sounds and used her massive head to gently nudge the baby into a different position. The baby immediately stopped shivering and settled comfortably against its mother's warm body. "She just showed us that this baby needed to be repositioned to stay warm," Lisa said with amazement. "She's actively teaching us about dragon physiology and care." Marcus shook his head in wonder. The cognitive complexity required for that kind of behavior is extraordinary. She's not just protecting her young, she's collaborating with us to provide better care. The scientists took turns maintaining watch throughout the night, keeping the heaters fueled and monitoring the condition of their remarkable companions. As the hours passed, they began to notice more details about dragon behavior and biology. The baby dragons, who appeared to be very young based on their size and dependence on their mother, showed distinct personalities. The largest baby was bold and curious, often lifting its head to watch the humans and occasionally making small chirping sounds. The smallest baby was more timid, but seemed to be the most responsive to warmth and comfort. The middle baby appeared to be the most playful, despite their difficult situation, occasionally engaging in gentle wrestling with its siblings. The mother dragon's behavior toward her babies revealed a complex emotional bond. She would nuzzle each baby individually, making specific vocalizations for each one that almost seemed like names. She would also arrange them in different positions throughout the night, ensuring that each baby had equal access to warmth and comfort. Most remarkably, the mother dragon began to include the humans in her caregiving behavior. When Sarah was sitting near one of the babies, the mother would make specific sounds that seemed to be instructions or requests. When Marcus was monitoring the heaters, she would watch his actions carefully and make approving sounds when he adjusted them properly. Around midnight, an emergency situation developed that tested the growing trust between the humans and dragons. One of the baby dragons began showing signs of distress, making high-pitched crying sounds and moving restlessly despite the warmth from the heaters. The mother dragon immediately became agitated, making urgent vocalizations and nudging the baby with increasing concern. Lisa quickly examined the distressed baby and realized that it was suffering from more than just hypothermia. "I think this little one has an injury," she told her colleagues. "Look at the way it's holding its left wing. I think it might be broken." The challenge was how to examine and treat an injured baby dragon while keeping the mother calm and cooperative. The mother dragon was clearly very worried about her baby's distress, and her protective instincts were being triggered. Sarah had an idea. She began speaking to the mother dragon in the same gentle, soothing voice she had been using throughout the evening. At the same time, she gestured toward the injured baby and then toward Lisa, trying to communicate that the human wanted to help. The mother dragon watched Sarah's gestures carefully, then looked at Lisa, who was kneeling nearby with a first aid kit. After several tense moments, the mother dragon made a series of soft vocalizations and gently moved aside, allowing Lisa to approach her injured baby. Lisa carefully examined the baby dragon's wing while the mother watched every movement intently. The wing was indeed broken, but it was a relatively simple fracture that could be treated with basic first aid techniques. "I can stabilize this," Lisa said softly, "but I'll need to create a small splint and bandage the wing. The baby will need to be still during the process." The mother dragon seemed to understand that her baby needed treatment. She made calming sounds to the injured baby and used her massive head to gently hold it still while Lisa worked. The level of cooperation was extraordinary. The mother dragon was actively assisting in the medical treatment of her young. Lisa carefully splinted the broken wing using materials from their first aid kit. The baby dragon remained remarkably calm during the procedure, as if it understood that the humans were trying to help. When the treatment was complete, the mother dragon examined Lisa's work carefully, gently touching the bandage with her snout and making what sounded like approving vocalizations. The crisis had strengthened the bond between the humans and dragons even further. The mother dragon had trusted the humans to treat her injured baby, and the successful outcome had demonstrated that the humans were capable allies in caring for her family. As the night continued, the scientists began to piece together more information about how the dragon family had ended up trapped in the cave. Based on the evidence they observed, it appeared that the dragons had sought shelter in the cave when the ice storm began. The storm had been so severe and prolonged that ice had formed over the cave entrance, trapping them inside. The mother dragon showed signs of having attempted to break through the ice barrier. Her claws were worn and damaged, and there were scrape marks on the walls near the cave entrance where she had tried to dig her way out. She had clearly spent days trying to free her family before exhaustion, and cold had forced her to focus entirely on keeping her babies alive. "She's been protecting them for at least a week," Marcus observed. "Look at how thin she's become. She's been using all of her body heat to keep them warm, probably barely sleeping or eating." The dedication of the mother dragon to her babies was deeply moving to all three scientists. Despite her own exhaustion and stress, she had never stopped trying to care for her young. The humans' arrival had given her the first real hope she'd had since becoming trapped. As dawn approached, the scientists began to assess their situation more carefully. The portable heaters had kept the cave warm throughout the night, but fuel was becoming a concern. They had brought enough fuel for several hours of operation, but if they remained trapped in the cave much longer, they would need to find alternative heat sources. More importantly, the dragons would need food soon. The mother dragon hadn't eaten anything since the scientists had arrived, and while the babies were drinking water, they would need nutrition to continue their recovery. The challenge was that none of the humans knew what dragons ate. Sarah decided to try offering the dragons some of the emergency food from their supplies. She started with dried meat, which seemed like the most likely option for large carnivorous creatures. The mother dragon sniffed the offering carefully, then made encouraging sounds to her babies. To the scientists' relief, the dragons accepted the food eagerly. The babies were still too weak to eat much, but the mother dragon consumed several packages of dried meat with obvious hunger. It was clear that she hadn't eaten properly for many days. As the morning progressed, the scientists began to hear new sounds from outside the cave. The constant howling of the wind had stopped, and they could hear what sounded like mechanical noise in the distance. That might be rescue equipment, Marcus said hopefully. Our radio message might have gotten through after all. Sarah carefully climbed back through the gap in the ice wall to check the situation outside. The weather had indeed improved dramatically. The wind had stopped completely, and while it was still very cold, the visibility was much better than it had been for days. In the distance, Sarah could see several snowmobiles approaching across the frozen landscape. As they got closer, she could see that they were pulling large sledges loaded with equipment. Help was finally arriving. Sarah quickly returned to the cave to inform her colleagues and prepare the dragons for the arrival of more humans. The mother dragon had clearly heard the mechanical sounds from outside, and she was alert and slightly anxious about the new development. More people are coming to help, Sarah explained to the mother dragon, knowing that the creature couldn't understand her words, but hoping that her tone would convey reassurance. They're bringing equipment to help us get you and your babies out of here. The mother dragon watched Sarah carefully, then made a series of complex vocalizations that seemed to be asking questions. Sarah wished desperately that she could communicate more effectively with this remarkable creature. The rescue team that arrived consisted of 6 people with specialized equipment for dealing with emergency situations in extreme weather. They included emergency medical technicians, equipment operators, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, a wildlife expert who had been contacted when the scientists' original radio message had been received. Dr. Vasquez was the first to climb through the gap into the cave, and her reaction to seeing the dragons was immediate and intense. "This is extraordinary," she whispered, staring at the dragon family in amazement. "These creatures are completely unknown to science. We need to document everything and get them proper medical attention immediately." The rescue team quickly set up more sophisticated heating equipment and began the process of carefully documenting the dragon's condition. They also brought advanced communication equipment that allowed them to contact wildlife experts and zoologists around the world for advice on how to care for the creatures. But the immediate priority was getting the dragons out of the cave safely. The ice wall blocking the entrance was too thick to remove quickly by hand, but the rescue team had brought thermal equipment that could melt through the ice more efficiently. The challenge was carrying out this work without frightening the dragons. The thermal equipment was loud and produced bright lights that could be alarming to wild animals. The mother dragon was already showing signs of anxiety about all the new activity in her cave. Sarah took charge of communicating with the mother dragon during the rescue operation. She positioned herself where the dragon could see her and maintained a constant stream of calm, reassuring vocalizations. She also gestured toward the work being done at the cave entrance, trying to communicate that the humans were creating an exit route. The mother dragon watched the rescue operation intently, clearly trying to understand what was happening. When the thermal equipment first started operating, she became very alert and protective, positioning herself between her babies and the source of the noise and light. But as Sarah continued to communicate with her, she began to relax and seemed to understand that the humans were working to help her family. The work of melting through the ice wall took several hours, but gradually a proper opening began to emerge. As the rescue team worked, medical experts who had been contacted by radio provided advice on caring for the dragons based on what little information was available about large reptilian creatures. Dr. Vasquez worked with Lisa to conduct a more thorough medical examination of the dragon family. The baby with the broken wing was responding well to treatment, and all three babies were showing continued improvement from their hypothermia. The mother dragon was exhausted and undernourished, but appeared to be in relatively good health considering her ordeal. Most remarkably, the mother dragon cooperated fully with the medical examination. She seemed to understand that the humans were trying to assess her family's health, and she even helped by gently holding her baby still during the examination process. The level of intelligence and cooperation we're seeing is unprecedented, Dr. Vasquez reported to the experts waiting on the radio. These creatures are actively participating in their own rescue and medical care. They understand complex cause and effect relationships and demonstrate sophisticated communication abilities. As the day progressed, the rescue team made steady progress on opening the cave entrance. They also established a heated supply line that would allow them to maintain warmth in the cave while they completed the rescue operation. The dragons were becoming more comfortable with the increased human activity. The babies were now actively playing and exploring their environment within the safety of their mother's protective range. The mother dragon was eating regularly and seemed to be recovering her strength. Most importantly, the bond between the humans and dragons continued to deepen. The mother dragon had begun to respond to her name. The scientists had started calling her Frost because of how they had found her in the frozen cave. She would look up when they called her name and make acknowledging vocalizations in response. The baby dragons had also begun to show individual responses to the humans. The largest baby, whom they called Brave, would often approach the humans when they entered the cave. The smallest baby, Gentle, preferred to stay close to Frost but would accept food and attention from the humans. The middle baby, Swift, had become particularly attached to Lisa and would make excited chirping sounds whenever she appeared. As evening approached on the second day, the rescue team announced that they had successfully created an opening large enough to safely remove the dragons from the cave. The challenge now would be transporting creatures of this size across the difficult terrain to a location where they could receive proper long-term care. A helicopter had been arranged to transport the dragons to a wildlife facility that had experience with large exotic animals. The facility was equipped with heated enclosures and veterinary experts who could provide ongoing care while more permanent arrangements were made. But first, the dragons would need to be convinced to leave their cave. Despite the difficult conditions, the cave had been their home and shelter during the crisis. The mother dragon might be reluctant to take her babies into an unfamiliar environment, even if the humans assured her it was safe. Sarah spent the evening preparing Frost for the upcoming move. She showed the mother dragon the new opening that had been created and gestured toward the outside, trying to communicate that they would be leaving the cave. She also introduced Frost to the members of the helicopter crew who would be responsible for the transport, helping the dragon become familiar with the people who would be caring for her family. Frost examined the new cave opening carefully, sniffing the air from outside and listening to the sounds beyond the cave. She seemed to understand that a major change was coming, and she was carefully evaluating whether it would be safe for her babies. The rescue team had brought specialized transport containers that would keep the dragons warm and secure during the helicopter flight. These containers were large enough to accommodate the dragon family comfortably and were equipped with heating systems and monitoring equipment. As the preparations for transport continued, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. Just 2 days earlier, she had been a wildlife biologist checking weather monitoring equipment. Now she was part of the most significant zoological discovery in modern history. But more than the scientific significance, Sarah was moved by the personal relationships that had developed between the humans and dragons. Frost had shown incredible trust in allowing strangers to help her family. The baby dragons had accepted human care and attention as naturally as if the humans were part of their own species. The bond that had formed between two very different species in the depths of a frozen cave would continue to grow and develop as the dragons moved to their new home. The ice storm that had threatened to become their tomb had instead become the beginning of an extraordinary relationship between humans and dragons. As night fell on what would be their last evening in the cave, the dragon family and their human friends settled in together for one final night of shared warmth and companionship. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new adventures, but tonight they were simply families, one human, one dragon, who had found each other in their time of greatest need. The rescue operation had been successful, but the real story was just beginning. The dragons would need long-term care and study, and the scientific community would need to completely reevaluate their understanding of what life forms existed on Earth. But through it all, the foundation of trust and cooperation that had been established in the frozen cave would continue to guide the relationship between humans and these remarkable creatures. Frost made her gentle lullaby, sounds to her babies as they settled in for sleep, while the humans maintained their vigil nearby. The portable heaters hummed quietly, providing the warmth that had saved the dragon family's lives. Outside, the rescue equipment stood ready for the morning's transport operation. In just a few hours, the dragon family would leave their cave for the first time in weeks, beginning a new chapter in their lives and in the history of human-animal relationships. The ice storm was ending, but the story it had created was just beginning to unfold. #New Beginnings beyond the ice. The morning of the rescue dawned clear and cold, with the first sunshine the region had seen in over 2 weeks. Dr. Sarah Chun woke early in the cave, immediately checking on Frost and her babies. The dragon family was alert and active, clearly sensing that something important was about to happen. The rescue helicopter had arrived during the night and was positioned on a flat area about half a mile from the cave. The specialized transport containers had been brought to the cave entrance and were being prepared for the dragon family's journey to their new temporary home. Dr. Elena Vasquez had worked through the night, coordinating with wildlife experts around the world to ensure that the dragons would receive the best possible care. A facility in northern Canada had been selected because of its experience with large exotic animals and its location in a climate similar to where the dragons have been found. The facility has heated enclosures large enough for Frost and her babies, Dr. Vasquez explained to the team. They also have veterinary staff who specialize in reptilian care, even though they've obviously never worked with dragons before. Sarah knelt beside Frost, who was watching all the preparation activity with keen intelligence. The massive dragon had clearly realized that a major change was coming, and she was carefully evaluating everything she saw. "We're going to take you somewhere warm and safe," Sarah said softly, knowing that Frost couldn't understand her words, but hoping her tone would provide comfort. "You and your babies will have proper food, medical care, and protection while you recover from your ordeal." Frost made a series of low, musical vocalizations in response. Over the past 2 days, Sarah had begun to recognize different patterns in the dragon's communications. These sounds seemed to express both anxiety about the unknown and trust in the humans who had helped her family. The transport process will be delicate. The baby dragons would travel in one container, while Frost would be in a larger container nearby. The containers were designed so that Frost could see and communicate with her babies throughout the journey, helping to keep them calm during the flight. Dr. Marcus Webb and Dr. Lisa Rodriguez were documenting every aspect of the rescue operation. The scientific value of their observations was immense, but they were also creating a record that could help guide future interactions with the dragons. "Look at how she's preparing her babies for the journey," Marcus noted. "She's been grooming them more thoroughly this morning, and she's been making specific vocalizations to each one. It's almost like she's explaining to them what's going to happen." The baby dragons seemed to understand that they were about to leave their cave home. Brave, the largest baby, kept looking toward the cave entrance with curiosity. Gentle stayed close to Frost's side, clearly nervous about the upcoming change. Swift was more interested in the humans and their equipment, chirping excitedly whenever someone approached. The rescue team had developed a careful plan for moving the dragons from the cave to the transport containers. They would use heated blankets and portable warmers to ensure that the dragons stayed comfortable during the brief exposure to the outside temperatures. Dr. Vasquez would accompany the dragons on their flight to provide continuity of care and to help them adjust to their new environment. Sarah, Marcus, and Lisa would follow in a second helicopter, continuing their role as the primary researchers studying these remarkable creatures. As the morning progressed, it came time to begin the actual transport. Sarah approached Frost one last time before the move began. "This is going to be scary," she said gently, "but we'll be with you every step of the way. You've shown incredible strength and intelligence over the past few days, and I know you'll take good care of your babies during this journey too." Frost looked directly into Sarah's eyes and made a complex series of vocalizations that seemed to express understanding and determination. Then, she turned to her babies and began making the calming lullaby sounds that had comforted them throughout their ordeal in the cave. The transport team worked with smooth efficiency that came from years of experience with wildlife rescue operations. They carefully wrapped each baby dragon in heated blankets and gently lifted them into their transport container. The babies remained calm throughout the process, responding to their mother's reassuring vocalizations. Moving Frost was more challenging due to her size, but she cooperated fully with the process. She seemed to understand that the humans were trying to help her reach her babies, who were already secure in their container nearby. Once both containers were secured and the heating systems activated, the transport team began the careful journey across the frozen terrain to the waiting helicopter. The containers were mounted on specialized sledges that could navigate the icy conditions while keeping their precious cargo stable and warm. Frost remained calm during the transport, constantly making soft sounds to comfort her babies and occasionally responding to reassuring words from the humans walking alongside her container. The bond that had developed between the dragons and their human rescuers was clearly providing emotional support during this stressful transition. The helicopter flight to the wildlife facility took 3 hours, during which the dragons remained remarkably calm. The transport containers were equipped with windows that allowed Frost to see her babies and the humans accompanying them, providing the visual contact that seemed so important for her emotional stability. Dr. Vasquez monitored the dragons' vital signs throughout the flight, using equipment that had been adapted for their unique physiology. All parameters remained stable, she reported to the facility staff who were waiting to receive them. Frost's heart rate is elevated, which is normal for stress, but she's not showing signs of panic. The babies are actually sleeping for most of the flight. During the journey, Sarah reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. She had set out to check weather monitoring equipment and had instead discovered a new species that would revolutionize scientific understanding of life on Earth. But more than the professional implications, she had been part of forming a genuine emotional connection between humans and dragons. The wildlife facility that would serve as the dragons' temporary home was located in a remote area of northern Canada, surrounded by forests and mountains that provided a natural environment similar to where they had been found. The facility specialized in caring for large animals that couldn't be released immediately into the wild, often serving as a rehabilitation center for injured wildlife. Dr. Jennifer Kumar, the facility's director, had worked with her staff around the clock to prepare for the dragon's arrival. They had converted their largest enclosure into a specialized habitat with multiple heat sources, comfortable resting areas, and equipment for monitoring the dragon's health and behavior. "We've prepared an enclosure that's over 200 square meters," Dr. Kumar explained as the helicopter approached the facility. It has both indoor and outdoor areas, multiple temperature zones, and observation areas where the research team can continue their studies without disturbing the family. The facility staff had also consulted with experts in reptilian biology, animal behavior, and exotic animal care to develop feeding and care protocols for the dragons. While much would need to be learned through direct observation, they had created a foundation based on the best available scientific knowledge. The arrival of the helicopter created quite a stir at the facility, even though the staff had been preparing for this moment. Many of the workers had never seen anything like the dragons, and there was a sense of excitement and responsibility as the transport containers were carefully moved into the prepared enclosure. Frost was released first, emerging from her transport container into the spacious enclosure with obvious relief at having room to move freely again. She immediately began exploring her new environment, sniffing the air and examining every corner of the space. The baby dragons were released next, and they immediately rushed to their mother's side. The reunion was touching to watch, as Frost carefully inspected each baby to ensure they had not been harmed during the journey. The babies chirped excitedly and pressed close to their mother, clearly happy to be reunited with her in their new home. Sarah, Marcus, and Lisa were given observation positions where they could continue their research while the dragons adjusted to their new environment. The facility had installed advanced monitoring equipment that would allow them to study dragon behavior and physiology in much greater detail than had been possible in the cave. Over the following days, the dragons began to adapt to their new home with remarkable ease. Frost explored every aspect of the enclosure, establishing preferred resting areas and investigating the various heat sources and feeding stations that had been provided. The babies thrived in the stable, warm environment. Swift, who had shown the broken wing, healed completely and was soon flying short distances around the enclosure. Brave grew more confident and adventurous, often leading his siblings in play sessions. Gentle remained the most cautious, but showed steady improvement in strength and activity. Most remarkably, the dragons maintained their positive relationship with humans. Frost continued to respond to her name and would approach the observation areas when the research team was present. The babies showed individual preferences for different humans and would often seek attention and interaction. Dr. Kumar was amazed by the dragon's behavior. In 30 years of working with exotic animals, I've never seen creatures adapt this quickly to a new environment. Most animals show significant stress behaviors for weeks or months after a major relocation. These dragons seem to understand that they're in a safe place. The scientific community's response to the discovery of the dragons was immediate and intense. Researchers from around the world requested permission to visit the facility and study the creatures. Media attention was carefully managed to protect the dragon's privacy while sharing the significance of the discovery with the public. Sarah found herself at the center of an international phenomenon. As the lead researcher who had discovered the dragons, she was invited to speak at conferences, write papers, and consult on research projects around the world. But she insisted on maintaining her primary focus on the welfare and study of Frost and her babies. The dragon's diet was established through careful experimentation. They were omnivorous, eating both meat and various plants, with preferences that varied between individuals. Frost showed a particular fondness for fish, while the babies preferred smaller portions of mixed foods. Medical examinations revealed fascinating details about dragon physiology. Their body temperature regulation was remarkably sophisticated, allowing them to maintain optimal internal conditions across a wide range of environmental temperatures. Their respiratory system was equally impressive, with lung capacity that explained their ability to vocalize so effectively. Most intriguingly, brain scans revealed neural structures that suggested cognitive abilities comparable to some of the most intelligent mammals. The complexity of dragon communication became more apparent as researchers documented hundreds of distinct vocalizations with specific meanings and contexts. As weeks passed, the dragon's recovery was complete, and they had fully adapted to their new environment. But important decisions needed to be made about their long-term future. They couldn't remain in the rehabilitation facility indefinitely, and returning them to the wild posed challenges given the attention their discovery had generated. After extensive consultation with experts in animal welfare, conservation biology, and ethics, a decision was made to establish a permanent research and conservation facility specifically for the dragons. The facility would provide them with a natural habitat while allowing continued scientific study and ensuring their protection from exploitation. The new facility was designed with input from the dragons themselves. Researchers observed their preferences for different types of environments within their current enclosure and incorporated these findings into the design of their permanent home. Construction of the new facility took several months, during which the dragons continued to grow and develop. The babies reached adolescence and began showing the first signs of their adult capabilities. Their flying skills improved dramatically, and they began to exhibit more complex social behaviors. Frost proved to be an exceptional teacher, showing her young ones how to hunt, how to use their various abilities, and how to interact appropriately with their human caretakers. The researchers documented elaborate teaching behaviors that revealed the sophisticated nature of dragon family structures. The bond between the dragons and their original human rescuers remained strong throughout this period. Sarah visited the facility regularly, and Frost would always greet her with special enthusiasm. The research team had become an extended family for the dragons, providing both scientific study and emotional support. As the dragons prepared to move to their permanent home, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with an ice storm and a chance discovery in a frozen cave. The relationships that had formed between humans and dragons had fundamentally changed both species' understanding of intelligence, cooperation, and friendship across biological boundaries. The new facility was located in a protected wilderness area, providing the dragons with thousands of acres of natural habitat, while maintaining the security and research capabilities necessary for their continued study and protection. The design included caves similar to those where they had been found, open areas for flying, and various temperature zones to accommodate their preferences. The day came for the dragons to move to their permanent home. Unlike the emergency rescue from the cave, this transition was carefully planned and executed over several days to minimize stress and ensure a smooth adjustment. Frost and her family approached their new home with curiosity rather than anxiety. They had learned to trust their human companions and seemed to understand that this move represented another step toward a better life. The first few weeks in the new facility were a period of exploration and discovery. The dragons quickly established territories within the vast enclosure, with Frost claiming a large cave system for the family's primary residence. The young dragons delighted in having room to fly freely and began developing their aerial skills with impressive speed. Research continued at the new facility, but with an emphasis on non-invasive observation that allowed the dragons to live as naturally as possible. The knowledge gained from studying these remarkable creatures had already led to breakthroughs in understanding intelligence, communication, and social behavior across species. Most importantly, the dragon story had captured the imagination of people around the world. Their rescue from the ice storm had become a symbol of the importance of protecting and preserving all forms of life, regardless of how different or unexpected they might be. Educational programs at the facility allowed carefully managed public access to learn about the dragons and their conservation. These programs emphasized the dragons' intelligence, the importance of their protection, and the remarkable story of cooperation between species that had made their survival possible. Sarah continued her work as the lead researcher studying the dragons, but her role had expanded to include advocacy for their protection and education about their significance. She often spoke about the moment she first heard Frost calls from inside the frozen cave, and how that chance encounter had changed everything. The ice storm could have been their tomb, Sarah would tell audiences. Instead, it became the beginning of one of the most important relationships in the history of human and animal interaction. It taught us that intelligence and emotion exist in forms we never expected, and that cooperation between species can overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Years later, Frost and her offspring continued to thrive in their protected home. The babies had grown to full adulthood and had families of their own, creating a small but stable dragon population. The research facility had become a model for ethical wildlife conservation and interspecies cooperation. The story that began with an ice storm had evolved into something far greater than anyone could have imagined. It had demonstrated that even in the most desperate circumstances, trust and cooperation could create bonds that transcended the boundaries between species. The dragons and their human friends had proven that when different forms of intelligence worked together, they could overcome any challenge. The ice storm was long past, but its legacy lived on in the ongoing relationship between humans and dragons. In a world where such relationships were thought to exist only in fantasy, Frost and her family had made the impossible real. Their survival and thriving served as a reminder that the natural world still held wonders beyond human imagination, and that the greatest discoveries often came from the most unexpected encounters. The frozen cave where it all began had been preserved as a monument to the power of compassion and cooperation across species. Visitors could see the place where human and dragon families first found each other, where trust was built in the depths of a crisis, and where one of the most remarkable rescue operations in history had taken place. But the real monument to that ice storm was not carved in stone or metal. It was living and breathing in the form of the dragon family who had survived against all odds, and the human friends who had chosen to help strangers in need. Their story continued to unfold each day, a testament to the extraordinary things that could happen when different species chose cooperation over fear, understanding over prejudice, and hope over despair. The ice storm that had threatened to become their tomb had instead become the foundation of their new life together. And in the years that followed, that foundation proved strong enough to support not just their survival, but their flourishing as partners in one of the most remarkable relationships ever documented between humans and the wild creatures that shared their world.